Hey guys, welcome to another Theology Thursday. This time our question is, when did Satan, also called the devil or Lucifer, become the god of this world? And that's a really interesting question because by the time we get to the New Testament, that phrase is used, or that idea is brought up numerous times about Lucifer being in charge over the earth, over this world. And different passages point this out. That specific phrase, God of this world, or sometimes translated God of this age, comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4. But even Jesus in John chapter 13 and 14 refers to Satan as the God of this world, or the ruler of this world. And another key passage is in Ephesians chapter 2, where he's referred to as the prince of the power of the air. And perhaps the clearest example of this we see is in the temptation of Jesus, that when Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days and nights to be tempted there by Lucifer, the culminating temptation is that Satan shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and says that he would give them to Jesus if only Jesus would bow down and worship him. Now, a temptation is only tempting if you have that thing to offer as a temptation. If I tell you I'm going to give you $1 million if you do 5 cartwheels on Friday, that's only tempting if I have $1 million to give you. And so if Lucifer did not have control and authority over all the kingdoms of this world, then he would not have been able to offer them to Jesus as a temptation. But that's the New Testament. Where did we get this idea from? And the question that we were asked is, when did Satan become the god of this world? And the problem with that is some passages in the Bible state things explicitly, word for word. 1 John chapter 4 tells us explicitly God is love. That lets us know that is his very nature is love. But many times concepts are taught implicitly. They're implied over time. Things like the idea of the Trinity. You won't find a specific passage that uses that phrase Trinity. But the concept of the Trinity is taught throughout the New Testament. And if we know what we're looking for in the Old Testament. So to put this together, we have to go back to the beginning and read the Bible through the lens of the audience it was originally written to. Dr. Michael Heiser said this, and I thought it was so good. He said, the Bible was written for us. It was not written to us. The Bible was written for us, not to us. And what he means by that is that, yes, as followers of Jesus, as worshipers of the one true God, the scriptures, the Bible, is written for us to learn and to know God and understand his character and how he works throughout history to accomplish his purposes. But it was not written to us specifically, that the Holy Spirit inspired specific authors to write to specific audiences in specific atmospheres, addressing specific issues in specific points in history. And so to read the Bible, we must study it well. And so if we go back to the very beginning, the creation account in Genesis and the description of the Garden of Eden and the fall of humanity, we end up running into a very interesting passage where a snake comes and deceives Eve into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now notice Eve never freaks out and says, a talking snake. Because in ancient Mesopotamian literature, the people of the day would have understood that the anthropomorphization in that passage and the play on words of the word nasheth there is a multiple meaning word. It can mean snake, but it can also mean the shining one. And it's a play on words. It's a literary device that was used, and they understood that when you saw an anthropomorphized animal, it almost always referred to a heavenly being. And this is a lone narrative Moses is borrowing from the Mesopotamian culture of the Akkadians, the Sumerians, the Babylonians. They all have narratives of heavenly beings in snake form who deceive humanity, usually a woman. And often that snake being has control over, the underworld and trees and fruits and things like that. We see this is called syncretism when it comes to religious narrative. And as a Egyptian, or he was a Hebrew raised in the Egyptian culture, Moses would have been very familiar with this literary tool, and so would his audience. And so this isn't meant to say that did not happen, but the narrative is borrowing from the genre of the day, the same way our stories and narratives, the same way Jesus taught in parables. These are real events that happen, but they are described in terms the audience would understand. So Lucifer, as a heavenly being, deceived Adam and Eve, but that deception carries more than just rebellion and a disobedience to God's command. You see, Adam and Eve had a birthright. When God created them and he told them, he gave them this command, he said, be fruitful and multiply, rule over the earth and govern it. Some translations say rule and reign over it. This is the idea of kingship, of a monarchy, that Eve and Adam were kings and queens, that they were rulers over the earth, and Lucifer took that from them through deception. He tricked them out of their birthright, and that is the point where he became the ruler of this world. He was cast down to this earth, and the actual narrative says that the serpent, referring to Lucifer, would eat the earth. And that's not a literal thing, because snakes don't eat dirt. It's a phrase, a poetic understanding that to eat the dirt meant he had to be in it, and he would be in the underworld. And that's where we connect these ideas. That's where Lucifer becomes not only in control of the earth, but also we get this idea of him being in control of the underworld. And so, when does this happen? Well, it's not explicitly stated. I can't point to one specific passage and say, this is when Lucifer became the god of this world, the ruler of this world, as Jesus called him, or the prince of the power of the air who's at work in the minds of people, as Paul wrote in Ephesians. But I can show you how it is implied there. So hopefully that answers your question. Maybe it raises other questions. And if you've got questions, you can send them to me in a direct message, or you can just post it here on this post. So thanks for joining us for this Theology Thursday, and until next time, be blessed.